Welcome back to Aetheral Space 2.6. We are here.
Aetheral Space!
Yes, you've heard of him. Dragon Aetheral Space.
That's his name.
So,
Do they call outer space Aetheral Space in this world?
No, they do not.
Where does the name come from? Are you going to say the phrase Aetheral Space at least once in the course of the work?
I will.
Poggers!
What are we, huh? Some kind of Aetheral Space?
Welcome to the Aetheral Space. Alright, that's enough fucking around with random bullshit. The recap, Tan, you do it this time.
So previously, the fight ensued with the spy creep. I mixed every possible descriptive word.
I actually came up with a really good name. I came up with a good name.
I like
for the
how
creature.
I mixed every descriptive word about the creature together into a word that does not describe it at all.
Hear me out. I came up with a good name for it. The Slider.
The Slider, okay. So they fought the Slider, which was a guard placed there by the Gene Tyrants, just sort of an automatic defense there, and they fucking murdered it. There's no easy way to say it. They kicked the shit out of it until it died.
But at a cost.
But then Serena tapped its foot and it activated like its self-destruct with a poison its attack there, and someone breathed it in. So right now,
someone was Bruno and Serena.
Yeah, Bruno took over and was like, "Oh shit, I gotta get a shield up," but it was too late. They took in a big whiff.
Yeah.
And then Dragon went in and dragged them out.
Like a firefighter or a hero.
Yeah.
He's a big hero.
Or the big heroes have the same story. Their bodies moved before they could think. You
can see the My Hero Academia in it, the fucking Midoriya, without even thinking. His feet moved. So, as a heads up, my throat and my nose have been very phlegmy, so if my voices aren't as good, apologies, and I may need to popcorn to Tan. I'm going to try to keep reading these, because I know that's his favorite, but be gentle with me.
No worries at all.
Alright. So, when they brought the patient in, he already looked halfway to corpsehood. His skin was a sickly pale of gray, and his bloodshot eyes darted around from place to place, as though watching terrors that existed only in his brain, and when the foam rose up in his mouth, his saliva was an awful orange. His thrashing made it difficult, but after a minute or two, Mila and the outsiders managed to get him secured in the bed, injected with a relaxation drug to stop him from injuring himself. That did alleviate the other symptoms, of course, but it made them easier to treat.
This is you if you're a cult.
They moved Dean out of the medical tent. His arm had healed to a point where he could be on his own, and they definitely needed the space right now. Sunset light shone through the... I would have just wrote sunset. Or the light of the sunset. I don't know. Sunset light shone through the thin fabric walls as Mila looked her patient over. The outsider stood just a short distance away, leaving her room to do her work. "What happened?" Mila demanded, raising her voice to be heard over her patient's wheezing breath. "Answer! Quick, quick!" The red-haired girl, Rudy or something like that, I guess we're in Mila's perspective, spoke up, anxiously stammering. The fly, it blew up!
I don't even remember when I mentioned that Ruth in the original, let's say, prototype April Space, her name was Rudy, so that's a little in-joke.
One thing I've noticed, and obviously she has a reason to be anxious, but she does seem, I wouldn't say timid, but she seems to get anxious a little more easier than, like, the first time she showed up and was like, I don't give a fuck about what's going on. I'm gonna kill everyone. She was, like, cocky during the interview, and she gets anxious very easily now. She got anxious about Skipper, about Bruno.
In a situation where she's interacting with someone who she does not care whether they like her or not, I guess.
That's true. I think what I'm thinking is when it comes to her own safety, she's not that anxious, but when it's like the safety of someone she cares about, she freaks out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because she's freaked out for Skipper, she freaked out for Bruno, but even when she was like in the middle of the Supremacy ship as a prisoner, she's like, I don't give a fuck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mila looked away from her. There was no time to wrestle the coherency out of her. Mila needed quick answers now, or it would be too late. She pointed at the shorter boy next to her, the silver-haired one. "You," she said terse. "What happened?"
You,
He almost looked like a... That's why I can insert myself as Dragon, because he too is a manlet. He almost looked like a scolded child. The boy gulped, then launched into an explanation. "We went after the experiment that had attacked Ian. We managed to kill it, but then Serena kicked it and it, well, blew up. Released some kind of gas, I think. Probably a contingency, measure, I think." "Anything else?" said Mila, running the fetcher analysis pen. It was orange. Okay. Orange. That could mean quite a few things. None of them good. None of them good at all. The thing to determine was just how bad the situation was. Once she'd done that, she could enter the realm of solutions. "Hold his mouth open," snapped Mila, shaking the analysis pen ready. It was a small white rod with a tiny display on the side, ready to report its findings. I need to get a sample of whatever he breathed in. The leader of the outsiders, Skipper, reached forward, holding the victim down with one firm hand and holding his jaw open with the other. "Make it fast," he said, voice serious. "I won't be able to keep him down for too long." Mila nodded and reached forward, putting the sensor end of the analysis pen into the victim's mouth. The pending symbol appeared on the display. It'd take a few seconds to isolate the hostile element and identify it. She blinked rapidly. A line of sweat had run down into one of her eyes. There was a beep from the pen, and she pulled it free, turning it over in her hands until the display was facing her. Oh, it's like one of those thermometer things, but instead of a thermometer, it detects stuff.
Yeah.
Like, you stick it in your mouth, and it's she read the tiny words written there in uniform font. Decimatus-3. I love that name. She frowned. It was going to be a long night. Decimatus. I will decimatus this universe.
Very good thing to see that you have inside of you.
Yeah, fucking a chuny demon. It took hours, nearly all the antitoxin supplies the doctor had stored up, but Bruno and Serena looked like they were going to last. They still looked like a disaster, of course. Bloodshot eyes and pale skin. But Dragon supposed that at least was unavoidable when you breathed in a substance specifically designed to kill you in the most painful way possible. "Decimatus-3," said Mila, holding up an old script. She'd plugged her analysis pen into the side of it, and information on the substance inside Bruno was being... your name's in the way. Being displayed on its screen. "It's an old gene tyrant poison. Decimatus-1 was near instant death for executions. Decimatus-2 was slow agony for interrogation." She trailed off, looking down at her script uncomfortably. Skipper looked at her, mouth a flat line. "And Decimatus-3?" he said. Mila spoke. "Decimatus-3 is a slow, painful death. It was for making an example out of people." Dragon winced. They'd had to apply a substance to his own eyes to stop the stinging, and now he was appreciating just how close he had come to ending up just like Bruno and Serena. He'd had the stuff all around him, for God's sake. "Is there a cure?" said Ruth, anxiety in every syllable. Are they gonna die no matter what?" Mila drummed her fingers on the table, looking uneasy. "Not necessarily. I've asked Helga about this, and there is a treatment that's been successful before." "And that is?" said Skipper. "Well," said Mila, "Decimatus-3 was an engineered substance, so the gene tyrants built in a way to stop it, too, in case they ever needed to pardon someone who'd been dosed with it. 3 chemicals introduced in a specific ratio, and the poison destroys itself, like pressing an off switch. 2 of those chemicals I could synthesize here on Yazlov, but the third is a little rarer," said Dragon. "Exactly. The third is called Rospalox." And it's used... Sorry, I know this is serious, but these names are so silly sounding. "And it's used as a fungicide on a few UAP planets. You could probably grab some on the market, but it'd be a trip to the nearest inhabited world." Skipper's face was steel. "We'll grab it." "Are you sure?" Mila said. "Even with the ship you have, there's no guarantee you'll be fast enough to—" "We'll grab it," said Skipper, a portrait of resolve. Then he glanced towards Dragon. "Me and Ruth will fly to the nearest place with Rospalox, grab the stuff, come back as quick as possible." Dragon's brow furrowed. "Ruth and you?" Skipper nodded. "You'll stay here. I need someone to look after Bruno and Serena while we're gone. Can you do that?" Doubt swam inside Dragon's heart. It wasn't that he was unwilling. Even though Bruno had been a dick to him, Serena had been perfectly friendly. But he didn't know how much use he would be. He couldn't help with medical matters, and as a combatant he was nothing to write home about. In fact, Skipper's hand landed on his shoulder. A firm grip. A firm gaze. Right into Dragon's eyes. "Dragon," he said serious. "Can you do that? Can I trust you with this?" Dragon nodded. Hesitant at first, then with confidence. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, you can." The grasslands of Yazlov were still at night. Not even a single gust of wind disturbing their tranquility. It was as if the whole world were a statue, stone carved into exacting resemblance, just like the flies in the palace. The grass glowed slightly in the dark, green bioluminescence shining out from every single blade, an endless sea of green light below, the pale glow of moonlight above. Nothing natural could disturb this scene. The grass moved, crunching underfoot and dimming slightly as a figure moved through it. It wouldn't be accurate to say that the figure walked, although their feet did move up and down on the ground. They held themselves with such grace and fluidity that they seemed to almost glide across the green sea. The figure was a red shadow clad in an all-concealing crimson mantle. Age, gender, face, all was concealed. The red shadow looked right, left, checking for observers. A dark mask concealed its face, but it could see out of it just fine. Then it looked up, towards the ruins. They had moved behind it so they could climb its outer surface unnoticed by the humanists. It wouldn't do to have witnesses. It would be unacceptable, in fact. The things that they did must never be discovered. The shadow began to climb, hands finding each crack in the stone with ease, pulling themselves up with such speed it would look to an observer as if they were simply sliding up the wall. Oh my god, I'm just imagining this person no-clipping through the world. They don't, walk, they just, sliding up the wall. Just a video game glitch. They left no trace of their passing. Not even a fragment of stone was left out of place once their hands left each gap. They were a living ghost. There was a rumbling from the distance. The shadow paused to look, perched in a crack like a bird of prey. Their black mask watched silently, so still they could have been part of the stonework. The star yacht was taking off, soaring up like a shooting star returning from the sky. The green light of the grass and the white light of the moon were both reflected off of it, making it seem a bizarre kaleidoscope as it took off into the clouds. After a second, the ship was gone. The shadow wouldn't have long then. It continued climbing. After 2 or 3 minutes, the red shadow reached the top of the palace. This was a simple roof, where nobody was meant to actually go, but the architects of this place had spared no thought for such logical concerns. The roof was another garden of statues. Countless stone copies of the same beautiful girl posed throughout its boundaries. An eerily symmetrical face, flowing, ethereal hair. Limbs ball-jointed like a doll. The visage of Elizabeth, Lady of Flies, was unmistakable. The craftsmanship was superb. Likely the statues had started off as engineered organisms that hardened themselves into carbon when prompted by some chemical. A whole life orchestrated, just to die looking pretty. A mixture of bitterness and admiration surged through the shadow's mind, but it shook it off. This was not the time for such things. The shadow wasn't alone, after all. From every unseen spot in the Garden of Corpses, there was the subtle sound of slithering, of hissing. The beast that had attacked Dian had been the most impressive guard, needless to say, but that didn't mean the security for the rest of the palace was lax. Wait, is this Elizabeth, or another creature, at least, of the... Is that the implication here?
We will see.
Alright, my throat's starting to go. Would you mind taking over? 4 serpentine
sure.
creatures.
4 serpentine creatures poked their head out of shadows, inspecting the red shadow. Their bodies were dark green, like vines wrapped around each other to form rope, and their heads were like a triangular fly trap, a flappy jaw separated into 3 sections. Plants with delusions of reptilia.
Oh, I like that sentence a lot.
They weren't that much of a threat. The shadow knew that with a second's glance. If it looks like a snake, then it could die like a snake. The creatures lunged forward, digestive fluids already dripping from their mouths, but the shadow was ready. It flowed around their predatory strikes, cloak moving like water, and it dispatched 3 of the serpents with curt, business-like thumps of its fist, like a knocking knocking on a door, I think that should be. Their heads burst into green viscera, utterly demolished. The shadow...
the raw power, all he has to do is simply knock his fist and they explode.
Well, onto their heads.
Oh.
The shadow's hand flickered with dark red aether, only in the moment it struck the enemy. Using aether like that saved effort, and meant that each individual blow could use the maximum amount of power, but the resultant lack of defense made the shadow vulnerable to sneak attacks.
So I don't believe we've seen Dark Red Aether, so this has to be a new character. This isn't like a secret... Or at least a character that before didn't show they had Aether or something.
Yeah, we've not seen
we haven't seen Dark Red Aether yet, right? Or is Ruth's Dark Red?
No, just normal red.
Okay.
That was fine, though. It had no fear of sneak attacks. The last serpent lunged forward, jaws rushing towards the shadow's neck. It had no fear of death. The god that had made it had no reason to give it a fear of death. The red shadow stepped backwards, allowing the snake to lunge into the empty space in front of it. Then, with practiced efficiency, it grabs the serpent with 2 hands. One just... probably both hands, probably better. One just below the head, the other at the tail end. The snake writhed, tried to break free, but it was too late.
So these are plants that act like snakes, right?
It's plant organisms. Aether, the colour of dried blood, sparked along the joints of the shadow's arms for a moment, providing them with a split second of intense strength. Then, with the slightest soft grunt of exertion, it pulled, and the serpent was ripped in half. The aether faded into nothing the second it was no longer needed. The creature made no sound as it died, and what amounted to its organs oozed half liquid from the open ends of its body. Its loyalty was pre-programmed, its dignity and death even more so. Elizabeth had not wanted a guard whose death would disturb her tranquility. The shadow dropped the already decomposing remains of the snake on the ground and turned away, the engagement already fading from relevancy. Guards like this were nothing. The shadow could fight hollow, emotionless beings by the hundreds and not feel a thing. If only it were so easy.
So, whoever this person is, they're currently moving through the castle, or wherever
they're
was
on the
they
roof of
explored.
it, yeah.
Okay.
It marched past the Garden of Statues, manoeuvred up a hill of debris to the highest point on the palace. It required elevation. The red shadow reached into its cloak, pulled a small disc free. The device was unlike anything else in the Humulist camp.
So they're a Humulist!
Not new exactly, but clearly built recently. The Humulusts believed that the world was already at a bursting point, and that to create new things within it was the height of a responsibility.
So it knows about the Humulist camp, so it's probably a Humulist.
We'll see. The shadow agreed. Perhaps that is why its hands shook as they delicately placed the beacon on a chunk of heaven-pointing rubble. It connected easily, sticking to the rock using built-in magnetic systems.
So this person is an actual shadow, but they're colored red?
Well, it's sort of just a descriptor. They're just wearing a red cloak.
Oh, I see.
Its hand reached out to tap the button on the top of the beacon, hesitated, then tapped it anyway. A holographic display popped out of the device, floated in front of the shadow's face. A text input. It tapped away for a few seconds, then read it back to itself. Wanted fugitives present. Fugitive. Skipper. Fugitive. Ruth Blaine. Fugitive. Jacob Del Said. Fugitive.
Oh!
Regarding...
So he's not Bruno or Serena. Why is he Jacob?
We'll see. It read the message back more than once, as if mulling it over. This was not yet a thing set in stone. It could still turn around, head back to camp, and go to sleep. Nobody would ever know. No, that kind of cowardice would doom both them and the ones they were doing this for. The red shadow finished typing its message. Dispatch relevant forces immediately for capture. GID authentication code 929-712-771-909. Message recipient, Special Officer Atoy Muzazi. The shadow hit send.
Alright, so this has to be either Helga or Mila. I guess it could be Aiden or Dean, but I really think it's one of those two because... Oh, I'm kind of leaning towards Helga because she's like... Or it hesitated, rather.
We will see. Dragana wakes up back in the field trading with Skipper.
at the fucking Apple stand. Oh man, I'm curious. What's going on here? I think it's obvious what the question is for this week for the commenters down below. Who the heck do you think this figure is? And why do they know specifically about Muzazi? Because this wasn't an email blast. They made it clear. Message recipient, Atoy Muzazi.
We will see.
So they have to have known who he is, right?
Mm.
And Muzazi's Aether is white, correct?
Yeah, bright white.
So this can't be him, whoever this figure is.
He would not send it to himself.
Emailing myself.
So yeah, I don't know if you sort of noticed that, but they also use Aether in a way that we haven't seen previously. So most people who use it, shown to us far, are like constantly using it, usually. Mm-hmm. Whereas it's described here that they only use it for the very second they make contact with what they're trying to hit.
I'm imagining the way they use their Aether then is in short but extremely powerful bursts rather than consistent armor
the rest
attack.
of the time, absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Oh, that's kind of cool. Oh, we got so much to wonder about. But I guess we'll have to find out next time. Bye!
Bye!